So for Afghanistan, 18 years. Meanwhile, the ostensible supposed goal for the war, defeating the Taliban, according to any metric, has completely failed. The Taliban is just as powerful now as it has been in the past. The Taliban controls half the country. Now, the Taliban's awful. They're extremely awful. And the U.S. would know because the U.S. supported the Taliban. The U.S. helped give birth to the Taliban in the 1980s by waging a jihadi war against the Soviet Union. The CIA spent billions of dollars supporting Salafi jihadists who later became Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. Also, what's really crazy, you can find, I'll share with you, you can find a press briefing of the State Department, the U.S. State Department, in the 1990s when the Taliban was solidifying control over Afghanistan after a bloody civil war. And the U.S. openly, publicly welcomed in the Taliban, taking over control of Afghanistan and providing so-called stability. So there's a history of the U.S. supporting the Taliban, and the fact that the U.S. is kind of fighting it now, we shouldn't forget that history. But let's talk about the current situation. So the Taliban is as strong as it has been really ever, controls half the country. It's been 18 years. Thousands and thousands of people have died, mostly Afghans, but also Americans. And here we are where a recent UN report found that the U.S. has killed more civilians than the Taliban has in this war. So this is a situation we're in, and most regional powers in Asia, and Afghanistan is in Asia. It might be a reminder to Americans, Afghanistan is not in the Americas, it's in Asia. And the U.S. is still fighting this war. Why? Well, there's two main reasons which we're not allowed to talk about. One, Trump himself admitted, is Afghanistan has an estimated $3 trillion of mineral wealth, especially certain rare earth minerals that we need to build technology. And more in the future, as renewable energy becomes a necessity to survive on this planet, oil is going to become less important, but rare earth minerals and certain minerals we need to create technology are going to become more important. Places like Afghanistan are chock full of these minerals. And 2 years ago, Trump actually admitted this, and the New York Times did a story about Trump found a reason to wage war in Afghanistan. It's huge mineral reserves. So that's a big element. And then something that gets no mainstream media coverage is also Afghanistan produces more than 90% of the world's heroin. And there has been a huge rise in heroin use, not just in the US, but in many countries around the world. Russia, many big countries have a huge heroin problem. And what's going on in Afghanistan is similar to what happened in the war in Vietnam, but also the wars in Central America, where the CIA and intelligence agencies are using drug money as a slush fund to support their so-called extra legal projects that are not approved by the U.S. government, by the Congress democratically. You know, the CIA does all these shadow wars and shadow campaigns and needs funding to do it. And in Central America, in its war in Nicaragua, we know Gary Webb, the journalist, famously exposed the CIA was using cocaine money to fund many of these things, and then taking the cocaine and selling it in black neighborhoods in the U.S., helping to create a crack cocaine epidemic. And then in Vietnam, there was another huge scandal in the so-called Golden Triangle, where the CIA was selling heroin not only to people in Vietnam and Laos, but also to its own soldiers, to U.S. soldiers who had there was a huge problem with heroin addiction in the U.S. Army during the war in Vietnam and Laos and Cambodia. And the same thing is happening in Afghanistan, where the rates of heroin production since the war began in 2001 have increased by like 10 times. They have skyrocketed. So we never can talk about the massive mineral reserves and the heroin rat line that is a huge part of this war in Afghanistan. The war in Afghanistan is not about democracy. None of these wars are about democracy. They're all about corporate profits and empire and making more money and controlling important strategic regions so we can have corporations can trade and take their resources and send other resources. Also, of course, Afghanistan is very strategically located. There's a huge U.S. military base, Bagram Air Base, right near Iran. So if the neocons like John Bolton really want to try to wage a war in Iran, they need Afghanistan to wage war in Iran.